My father never told us fairy tales. He stopped believing in magic. He told us real-life stories that, like fairy tales, contained kings, brave young men, and monsters. He didn't share those stories much, but when he did, he paused frequently to stop his tears from rolling. See that mountain over there, Sada? When I was a child, there was a helicopter parked on that mountain every day. Every day they watched us. They watched us as we ate, and they didn't pause to stop watching us as we played. It was as if that helicopter was part of that mountain. Times were different then. My father's stories always began this way. And in the end, my brother and I wonder how different they really were. Times were different then. World War II had just ended, and poverty quickly seeped into the Hebron Hills. Most children could not afford clothes or shoes. The refugee children walked barefoot from their refugee camp in Al-Fawar to my father's village in Dura, Hebron. Barefoot they walked, with the cold wind slapping their faces. Lips cracked, cheeks chapped. They walked with haste, all the while shivering. You've experienced the winters in Hebron, Sada. You could hardly take the cold. Well, the wooden stoves you see in the classrooms now were not there back then. The only thing keeping the children warm were the stone walls. The children arrived in their classrooms, blowing at their fingers, rubbing their arms, trying, but unable to focus on their lessons. The school bell would ring and the teacher would go inside. More often than not, he would pick on one of the students in bare feet and ask them a question. More often than not, the children were far too focused on their own shivers to reply. And the teacher would take a ruler, and sometimes even his belt, and abuse the children to the point of blood. These were segregated classrooms. The principal, who came from Nablus and didn't know the refugee experience in Hebron, thought that the refugee children would be negative influences on the refugee children would be negative influences on the West Bank children. They were not raised properly and must be segregated. He ordered the teachers to treat the refugee children differently than the West Bank children. They had to abide by stricter rules, and they endured heavier punishments. And although the teachers had to be careful of how they treated the West Bank students, for their parents might complain, they could do as they wished to the refugee children, for their parents had no say, for they were just refugees. Slowly the children began to see each other in the playground. They began to talk and share stories. And it is through these stories that the West Bank children learned that what they were told about the refugee children was neither true nor fair. And one day, a refugee child came to the playground with his little hands bleeding. The teacher had taken the punishment to an extreme and abused the child to the point of blood. The West Beck children were outraged. They huddled together and they came up with a plan. These grade 2 boys refused to go back inside of those classrooms until the segregated classrooms are abolished and everybody shared the same classroom and abided by the same rules. These 7-year-old boys walked from their school in village Dura to Hebron City to demand to speak to the Minister of Education. My father was amongst them. And when they arrived, the Minister of Education was surprised to see the boys. Ahlan! He welcomed them inside as he leaned upon the table. My father watched as the children's voices echoed one on top of the other. My father watched as the Minister of Education's line in the middle of his eyebrows deepened with each word he heard. And when the boys were finished, he thanked the boys. He told them that he had no idea what was happening in one of his own schools. And he immediately fired that principal, and the segregated classrooms were abolished. And the boys? The boys walked back to their classrooms feeling an inch taller. And from that day on, the students knew their power, and so did the teachers.